The sun burned low over the horizon, casting long golden rays across the sprawling plantation fields where silence spoke louder than the rustle of the sugarcane. The air was thick with rivalry and pride as two neighboring landowners, once friends and now bitter adversaries, stood facing each other by the old oak fence that marked the edge of their territories. Elias Carver, tall and stern with eyes sharp as his voice, was a man who built his world on control and appearance. Opposite him stood Nathaniel Brooks, a man known less for wealth but more for fairness and dignity, the kind of man who believed that strength wasn't measured by power but by how one carried it. Their feud had been brewing for months, each trying to outshine the other in labor, land, and influence. What began as competition over crop yields had turned into something personal, almost tribal. The workers whispered of the growing tension, the field hands could feel it in the air. It all came to a head one humid evening when Elias, in a fit of pride, issued a challenge that would echo through every corner of their small southern town. He declared that his best worker, a man named Samuel, would face any test Nathaniel could summon. The idea wasn't born out of fairness but out of ego, a twisted way to humiliate his neighbor under the guise of entertainment. Nathaniel, though wary of the cruel spectacle, knew that refusing the challenge would brand him as cowardly. He thought deeply that night, sitting on his porch with his daughters nearby, strong-willed young women who had grown up working the land beside him, not above it. They had learned endurance, compassion, and skill, values their father prized above all else. When he told them of Elias's challenge, they exchanged glances that carried both anger and resolve. It wasn't pride that drove them but something purer, the wish to show that strength has many forms, not always measured by muscle or ownership. The next morning, word spread across the valley that a contest was set at the border of the two plantations. Samuel stood quietly behind Elias, his broad shoulders glistening with sweat from morning labor, his expression unreadable but his eyes steady. Nathaniel arrived with his daughters, each dressed plainly, their hands rough from the field, but their stance proud and unflinching. There was no laughter, no cheer, only the murmur of the crowd that gathered to witness what they thought would be another show of dominance from a powerful man. Samuel bowed his head slightly as if apologizing to the world for what was about to unfold. Nathaniel's eldest daughter stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying the quiet storm of conviction. She declared that whatever the challenge may be, it would not be one of humiliation but of endurance, of work, of heart. Elias smirked, assuming it would still end in his favor. He ordered the test to begin, a full day's labor under the sun, from dawn till dusk, plowing, lifting, and harvesting. No tricks, no rest, no mercy. As the hours passed, sweat turned to steam and strength turned to willpower. Samuel worked tirelessly, every motion powerful yet precise, his face a portrait of patience. The daughters, too, worked beside him, matching his rhythm, refusing to falter. The crowd began to notice something strange. It was not competition that filled the air now, but unity. Samuel began helping them lift heavy sacks, sharing water when they stumbled. What began as a contest slowly turned into cooperation. The pride of one man was being undone by the humanity of those he sought to use. By the time the sun dipped below the trees, there was no clear victor, only exhaustion and quiet respect. Nathaniel looked toward Elias, whose arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by something close to shame. For the first time, he saw strength not as something to own, but as something to understand. Would you like me to continue the second session, where the emotional consequences of this contest unfold, revealing how Samuel and the daughters change both men's worlds forever? That evening, the air carried a strange stillness over the fields. The crowd had gone, yet the echoes of the day's labor remained, footprints in the soil, the smell of sweat, and something heavier, unspoken. Samuel sat by the water barrels, washing the dirt from his hands, but not from his thoughts. He had worked hard before, but never under such watchful eyes or with such meaning. For once, his strength had not been used as a tool of humiliation. It had been shared, respected, even admired. The 5 daughters, their palms blistered and muscles sore, lingered nearby, quiet and thoughtful. None of them felt like winners, yet something inside them had changed. They had looked strength in the eye and seen humanity reflected back. Nathaniel approached Samuel slowly, his voice gentle, thanking him not for his endurance but for his dignity. Samuel looked up, meeting his eyes, and there was no master and worker between them, only men who understood toil, pain, and pride. The eldest daughter, Eleanor, brought Samuel a small cup of water, her hand trembling slightly as she passed it to him. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the strange unity that had formed under the cruel weight of a man's pride. Elias watched from a distance. He stood by his fence, staring across the field that now seemed smaller than before. The arrogance that had once driven him had withered into a kind of confusion he didn't know how to name. For years, he had believed control was the only way to command respect, but that day, he had witnessed something he couldn't unsee, how shared hardship dissolved boundaries he had spent his life building. Night came heavy and humid. Crickets sang through the tall grass as lanterns flickered in both homesteads. Nathaniel's daughters spoke softly on their porch, replaying every moment of the contest, the heat, the pain, the look in Samuel's eyes when he helped them rather than outworked them. They spoke of fairness, of courage, of how their father's rival had been broken not by loss, but by the truth that men are not measured by who they serve but by how they stand. Across the fence, Elias poured himself a drink and sat in silence. For the first time, he questioned the system that had built his wealth. He thought of Samuel, not as property, but as a man whose strength came not from chains, but from spirit. That thought unsettled him more than any defeat could. The image of the daughters working alongside Samuel haunted him. He realized that power meant nothing if it couldn't command respect born of justice. The next morning, before dawn, Samuel was already at work, though the contest was over. Nathaniel came out to meet him, insisting he rest, but Samuel shook his head. "Work gives me peace," he said softly. The daughters joined him soon after, uninvited but determined, picking up tools as if the challenge still continued, not against him, but with him. Elias arrived later, riding his horse down the path between their lands. The fields looked different in the morning light, less divided, more alive. He dismounted, walked toward them, and stood watching for a long time before speaking. His tone was quieter than anyone had ever heard. He said he had come to pay his debts, not in money, but in acknowledgement. He offered Samuel his freedom papers and extended his hand, uncertainly, like a man learning to reach for the first time. The silence that followed was deep, stretching like the horizon itself. Samuel looked at him, not with gratitude, but with calm acceptance.